How ancient humans built houses away from caves. Picture yourself 200,000 years ago. It's getting dark, the temperature is dropping fast, and you're standing in an open field with nothing but the clothes on your back. No shelter, no cave nearby, just you and the wilderness. What do you do? Because somehow your ancestors figured this out. They didn't just survive, they thrived. They built homes in places caves couldn't exist, and the method they used was so effective that it shaped everything that came after, including the house you're sitting in right now. So, how did they do it? That's what we're exploring today. The first thing you need to understand is that caves were never the whole story. We've been told this narrative for so long, humans hiding in dark holes, huddling around fires, waiting for the sun to come back. And yes, caves were important. They provided protection from predators. They kept you warm. They were safe. But there's a problem with caves. They're not everywhere. And as human populations grew, as people moved into new territories, they ran out of caves to live in. They had a choice: stop exploring or figure out how to build shelter without one. They chose to build. The earliest structures we have evidence for go back further than most people realize. Around 1.5 million years ago, we're finding traces of what we think were human-made structures, not caves, built structures. Now, these weren't houses like you'd recognize them. They were simple, probably just a circular arrangement of stones, maybe some branches leaning against them. But here's the important part: they worked. And more importantly, they prove that humans understood a basic principle that would change everything. You can create shelter by building it yourself. By 400,000 years ago, the structures were getting more sophisticated. We're finding evidence of actual post holes. These are holes where wooden posts were driven into the ground. This tells us something profound. Humans weren't just stacking stones anymore. They understood load-bearing structures. They understood that if you could hold something up, you could put a roof on it. You could make an enclosed space. You could control your environment. This is where architecture begins. But let's stop and think about what this actually took. Because building a house from nothing when you've never built one before is genuinely difficult. You don't have power tools. You don't have saws. You have stone and bone and wood and your own hands. So how did they even know where to start? The answer probably comes from observation. Humans are watchers, especially ancient humans. They spent their entire lives observing the natural world. They would have noticed how animals built shelters, how birds wove sticks together, how termites built mounds, how trees created natural shelters with their branches. They would have noticed what kept them warm and what didn't, what let wind through and what blocked it. Over time, they would have started to understand the principles. Shelter works better when it's enclosed. It works better when it's small. It works better when you can control what gets in and what stays out. So the design that emerged was actually quite logical. It was probably dome-shaped or cone-shaped, and there's a reason for that. A dome or cone shape is stronger than a square. Wind doesn't hit it the same way. The load is distributed differently. Water runs off more easily. It's the most efficient shape for shelter with the materials they had. You'll see variations of this shape in human structures all across the world: teepees, yurts, igloos, the basic dome. They're not connected to each other through communication. They're all solutions to the same problem, and they all arrived at similar answers. Now, the construction process. This is where it gets interesting, because there are several ways to build a domed shelter, and different groups seem to have discovered different methods. One approach uses branches lashed together at the top to form a skeletal frame. The branches are tied with plant fibers or animal sinew. Then the frame is covered with hides or plant material. This method was probably used by nomadic hunter-gatherers because it's portable. You can take the frame apart, move it, and rebuild it somewhere else. The hides are what you're really carrying. The frame is just natural materials you find wherever you are. Another method is more permanent. This involves digging into the ground slightly to create a depression, then building a frame around it and covering it with sod or branches and mud. Some groups created actually remarkable structures this way. You'll find what we call semi-subterranean houses in many parts of the world. Parts of the house are below ground, which provides insulation and protection. Parts stick above ground, which lets smoke escape and lets you see outside. It's a clever compromise. The really sophisticated versions show evidence of planning. We find post holes that are dug to specific depths. We find evidence of supporting beams and ridge poles. We find variations in wall thickness. This suggests that people weren't just throwing something together, they were thinking about it, they were planning, they were probably learning from previous attempts. This worked better than that. Let's do it this way next time. This is design. This is engineering in its most basic form. And then there's the matter of the fire, because a shelter means nothing if you freeze to death inside it. The fire was essential, but fire inside a confined space creates problems. You need ventilation or you get smoke inhalation. You need to prevent the fire from spreading to your shelter material. So what did they do? They created specialized areas for fires, hearths. We find evidence of clay-lined fire pits, of areas carefully separated from the main living space, sometimes connected to the outside by a channel that lets smoke escape. Again, this shows planning. This shows understanding. This shows people thinking through problems and solving them. By 100,000 years ago, these structures were becoming genuinely complex. We're finding evidence of separate storage areas, sleeping areas, work areas, multiple hearths for different purposes. We're finding structures large enough to house multiple families. These weren't temporary shelters, these were homes, places where people expected to stay, places where they organized their lives around. The shift from caves to built structures wasn't just a change in where humans lived, it was a change in how they lived. And here's something almost nobody talks about. Building a house is one of the first ways humans transformed their environment on purpose, not because they had to, but because they could. Caves existed, they were ready-made. All you had to do was move in, but choosing to build, that's different. That's saying, I'm not accepting what nature gives me, I'm creating what I need. It's the beginning of the human project, the moment where we stopped just surviving within nature and started shaping it. The materials people used varied enormously based on where they lived. In areas with forests, they used wood. In areas with sparse trees, they used bone and ivory as structural elements. In grasslands, they used sod and stone. In areas with clay, they made mud bricks. Every environment presented different problems, and people solved them using what was available. This is adaptation. It's creative problem solving. It's engineering under resource constraints. But the real innovation was understanding what could work. Once you realize that you can build shelter from raw materials, you can go anywhere. You can leave the caves. You can cross deserts. You can move into tundras. You can follow herds of animals. You can settle fertile river valleys. You can build villages. You can build cities. All of it starts with the realization that you don't need a cave. You can make your own shelter. The transition from caves to built structures probably took longer than we realize. It wasn't like one day caves stopped being used and the next day everyone was building houses. It was probably gradual. People used caves when available, built structures when they weren't, combined them when possible. Over hundreds of thousands of years, as human populations grew, as people moved into new territories, the built structures became more necessary, more common, more sophisticated. And as they became more sophisticated, something else happened. Shelter became a marker of status. Some structures were larger, some were decorated, some probably had better materials. This is when shelter stops being just about survival and starts being about identity, about community, about showing who you are. This eventually leads to architecture as we know it, as art, as cultural expression. The evidence shows us something important about human nature. We are builders. When faced with a problem, I need shelter and there are no caves, we don't despair. We create, we innovate. We take what we have and transform it into what we need. This impulse, repeated thousands of times over hundreds of thousands of years, created civilization. It created your city, your house, your world. And if you look at the basic shape of a house even today, you'll see echoes of those ancient structures. A roof that sheds water, walls that block wind, an interior space that's controlled and organized, a separate area for heat and smoke. These aren't accidents, they're solutions that worked so well that we've kept using them. We've just added more complexity, better materials, different styles, but the fundamental idea remains. Humans saw a problem, we solved it with our minds and hands, and that solution worked so well that it never went away. The next time you sit in your house, think about that. Think about the 2 million years of human experience embedded in its design. Think about all the people who figured out through trial and error, through observation and innovation, how to create shelter from nothing. Your house is a monument to human ingenuity, to our refusal to accept limitations, to our endless drive to transform the world around us into something better. That's the story of how humans stopped needing caves, not through luck, not through finding better caves, but through deciding that they could do better, and then actually doing it.